Man, sometimes I wish worship would just keep going and keep going and keep going, especially when I have to come up here. Good morning. Hope you had a great Christmas. It was a wonderful Christmas at our house. We have 3 days later a new grandbaby, number three. He's 9 pounds, big hands. I'm gonna put a football in him real quick, get him going. But it was a blessing this whole week, and the new year is upon us, just like that. Just seems like 23 flew by. Here we are. And today, I want to give you just encouragement. I want to give you encouragement for the new year that you can take something from Scripture, take something from the Holy Spirit of God, and live it out this year. That you would have an abundant life of peace, that you would have an abundant life of just hope and joy. So, Holy Father, that's our prayer for today, that you would speak to us and encourage us in Jesus' name. Amen. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had to have a difficult conversation with somebody and you planned it out, maybe even practiced it in the shower, and you go and you have that difficult conversation and it goes south? Nothing like you expected. Have you ever had maybe a job opportunity that you took and they spelled it out? They even gave you a job description, and when you showed up, they said, yeah, we got to change some things, and then they flip it on you. That's called bait and switch, by the way. I've fallen for it many times in my life. I don't know how I do that, but I do. How about this? Have you ever had a relationship go south? One that you were counting on, one that gave you kind of a peace and hope. It's like, man, I really like this friendship. Maybe it was with a sibling. Maybe it was a parent-child relationship. Maybe it was marriage. Right? We all have expectations about life and relationships and how things should go. We actually start forming expectations when we're born. But expectations are what I wanted to discuss today. They naturally form. And, I have a really distinct honor in our church, and that is to meet people in crisis. I do that all the time. I meet with people in crisis, and more often than not, yes, it's a marital crisis. But I consider it a great honor. I consider it holy ground to meet with people and try to help them understand where they're at and where they need to go from here. Because our destination really is the throne room of heaven. And so when I meet with them, I find out, okay, the connection's lost. Why is the connection lost? When the connection is lost, what happens is expectations are not met. And they both tend to build up deficits in their needs. And then they go, what happened to us? And really, it all boils down to, I hate saying it, just a lack of communication. See, expectations can be a silent killer in relationships. They really can. But when we voice them, when we speak our expectations to one another, you know what they become? They become real. They become real lies. They become rules. They become boundaries. They become goals. Sometimes they remain pipe dreams as well. But what we want to do is not let expectations rule our relationships without voicing them. We have to grow in understanding of our expectations and become aware of these powerful notions, these powerful ideas, because they can lead us astray. And that's what I want to talk about. It's like, I believe we can form false expectations that hinder our faith from becoming what God intended us to become, and that is a really great family, encouraging one another. So we really must inspect and reflect and even research what true expectations in the faith are versus false expectations that can lead to disappointment. For example, we may believe that we can simply pray, and then our suffering, our dilemmas, just go away. They're magically healed, We may have that notion that struggles will end, but it doesn't happen that way, does it? How did it work out for Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? See, he doesn't promise that our struggles will go away. He promises to be with us in the struggle. He promises to get us through the struggle. And so, or how about this? We come to faith and we feel like all of a sudden we're immune to tragedy. We're immune to bad things happening to us. And when they do, there's the devil whispering in our ears, see, God doesn't care. Right? Well, we're not immune, are we? We're born into a dangerous world, sometimes a deadly world. And so there is strife and suffering that continue. But we're here as a church to help alleviate that for others. For alleviating that for each other. And through his Holy Spirit to bless one another through those times. To gather together in strength, just like we're doing this morning. To encourage one another in the faith and remember that this is not our destination. Our destination is above. And it makes sense when we get there. Everything, every tear, past, present, and future, washed away. So for now, how do we get through these times? God has communicated his expectations to us, hasn't he? And his expectations are true, so in a sense, they're our reality. They really are. These are his expectations. And his expectations are really not that hard. Love those who hate us. Well, maybe that's kind of hard. But really bless the poor, even with a cold cup of water. Not really high standards, friends. And we're to just simply love people for where they are at and help them understand and integrate into the life of faith. Those are really doable standards. We can do that. I suggest we are, of course, but his expectations are to also encourage us and think of good things that are coming our way. He's always going to surprise us in some way, shape, or form. It's interesting how false expectations can lead to false conclusions. And sometimes, I don't know why, we don't expect anything at all from God. I mean, think about that. There were 456 prophecies of the Messiah in the Old Testament. 456 that Christ fulfilled. But only 3 dudes from Baghdad knew he was coming and when. We all were expecting the Messiah, but they knew when he was arrived and born. That's astonishing. Are we expecting the right things? Are we expecting him to return? And are we expecting good things from the Lord? So I like the new year for reasons of just the fresh start. You know, we give ourselves a fresh start with the new year. We have all these new resolutions and such. And some people love that. Some people don't. And some people last 4 days. Some people last 4 weeks. Some people last 4 months. You know, resolutions really don't have a good track record, do they? But it is a fresh start where we can say, I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to grow this year. I'm going to become a better person. So I'm going to submit to you a resolution that you may need, you may want, and that is to be very hopeful and to be eagerly expecting something good from God because he has something good for each and every one of you, specific to your context of faith. I believe it's there. I believe Paul shares that. But I have met with quite a few guys lately who are all asking that question of me. Maybe it's a sign of the times. We see wars and rumors of wars, right? They're fearful of the tribulation. Like, are we going to be caught in it? You know, all those. I don't have all those answers. I really don't. But I do have an answer of what kind of attitude we should have, no matter our circumstances, that Paul gives us in Philippians. But just curious, how many believe there have been more earthquakes, more natural disasters, more wars in the last 200 years? Don't raise your hands. Don't nod or anything like that. How many believe that's the case? If you believe that's the case, then what you're looking at is new data, because the data that we have today says no. Same amount of earthquakes, same amount of wars. There's anywhere from 25 to 35 hot conflicts going on in the world, just like normal. When Jesus gave that word to the disciples, how will we know with your return? He said what? He said there'll be wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes in various places. He also said that people would be, working their jobs. They'd be getting married. They'd be having children. That's always been the case. That's still the case. So does that mean he's not coming? No, he's coming. He gave us some other things to look at. But what he was saying is, life's going to go on. We're going to work things out. Our job is to spread the gospel. That's what he was telling his disciples. And to eagerly expect his return. Paul was expecting his return before he died. All the apostles were. All of the writers were. They were expecting Christ's return before they would die. And there have been many times throughout history, in the church history, where there were people saying, this is a tribulation, this is the end times. And what it seemed to do was just exaggerate fears rather than faith. So what do we do facing this new year? And, I think some of the fears of this new year is, I hate to say it, it's an election year. Of course, they haven't let you forget that in the past 3 years, have they? No, they haven't. But C.S. Lewis said this during World War II on radio to encourage the people in Great Britain. He said, life has never been normal. Even those periods which we think are most tranquil turns out, on closer inspection, to be full of crisis, alarms, difficulties, and emergencies. He says it's never been normal in that sense. So if we look horizontally, yeah, that's what we're going to find. But when we look vertically, we understand that God has an abundance of peace for us in the midst of turmoil and maybe even tribulation. So today's verse, I want to get to that, of course. But in high school, who did FCA? Now you have to raise your hands. I want to know who was in Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I met my wife in Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And this is, if you're on a sports team in a high school and you join Fellowship of Christian Athletes, you have that one verse that you have to memorize, I think. I think it was a test, at least. And that is, what verse is that? It's Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And since that was our verse, God was on our side, not their side. And therefore, we can brutalize our opponents with impunity because God's on our side. Every FCA claimed that, so every sports team claimed that, and I used that verse. I learned that verse out of context, so I used it out of context. And it almost became like this magical incantation I was using to see if it would better my performance, and it didn't. So sports wasn't for me. That I can say that. It hurts to say that, but I can say that. But I remember that verse, and I said, as I got my call to ministry, I was like, I want to look into that a little bit more. See, as I used that verse out of context, I saw that it was not hard when you go into the context to see what Paul was saying. Paul crafted this specific verse, in a sense, this message, to a specific audience, the Philippians, at a specific time while he was incarcerated and probably suffering greatly. He was in chains, of course, and he was being transported, and the Philippians heard about his plight and sent help to him and reached out to him, and he wrote this letter back. It was a thank you letter. It was a sermon in absentia, so to speak. But in the Greek, what that verse actually says, it says, I am strengthened through Christ who strengthens me. Now, obviously, our interpreters were a little bit generous on what they put down in Scripture, but I am strengthened by Christ who strengthens me almost sounds like circular logic, doesn't it? It's like, what does that mean? What does it mean? I am strengthened by Christ who strengthens me. And I started thinking about it, started praying about it, and I had one of those moments where it's like, maybe this is it. And I think God revealed it to me. It was actually a old school Christian contemporary song that kind of inspired me to look at this, and that's Lincoln Brewster. Our God reigns, couldn't help it. So I started singing it, started thinking about it. And I found this point, Paul, there's four reasons why he stated this. And he had suffered a lot already. He was in the midst of suffering, but it didn't scare him. Death didn't scare him. And I'll tell you why. 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians, chapter 11, he says he had suffered time and again, and God really came through. He said he was in prison more often than anyone else, really, is what he was trying to say. Been whipped times without numbered, faced death again and again. 5 different times, the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 5 different times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Remember that. That's Acts chapter 14. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night, a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. I have faced dangers from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I've worked hard and long, and during many sleepless nights, I have been hungry, thirsty, and have often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. And yet he says, Philippians 11:13, I have learned to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing and with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or an empty stomach, with plenty or little, for I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. And I think the interpreters had trouble with, I am strengthened through Christ who strengthens me, because it just sounds like a little bit of circular logic. But Paul says at the very beginning of this letter, he says, for to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. He did not fear death. Why? Because he was stoned. Not stoned, but stoned to death. There you go. Not with substances. But he had a glimpse of heaven. He had a profound glimpse of heaven. And here it is, 2 Corinthians 12:2. I was caught up to the third heaven 14 years ago. Whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know. God only knows. Yes, only God knows whether I was in my body or outside my body, but I do know that I was caught up to paradise and heard things so astounding they cannot be expressed in words, things no human is allowed to tell. Paul had a life after life experience, friends. He knew the reward that waited him. That's why he was able to endure all what he was enduring for Christ. Thank God we will never be brought through that, right? But he said this, I was caught up to a third heaven. He was there. So he had no fear of death. He had a glimpse of heaven, and he knew he was a citizen of heaven by being there. And he uses that term, citizen of heaven, several times throughout just this book. I was caught up. So he says he was content because he knew what awaited him. His trust and hope in Christ was so assured, so certain, and so confident that any form of suffering only pointed towards his heavenly reward. Is that our faith? So he knew he was the citizen of heaven, but he knew something else. And this is where I believe the Lord told me to tell you, okay? He knew how to wait for God. He knew what waiting for God actually means. So he knew that those who wait upon the Lord shall what? Renew their strength. How's that verse go? But those who wait upon the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. Now, what does that word wait mean? In Old Hebrew, the word is kavah, all right? And it's an active verb, not a passive one. Those who wait upon somebody, they're eagerly expecting from God. Eagerly expecting. It has the notion that you are sitting there at the Lord's feet or in a king's chamber, looking to the king, saying, what can I do to serve you? It has that eagerness, knowing that the king is going to reward you. So there's this eagerness that God is going to what? Respond to your needs, respond to your expectations, to understand where you're at, which means to trust in him. And now that verse, I am strengthened through Christ who strengthens me, is the state of being after Christ has answered Paul. In other words, Paul was eagerly expecting God to answer. That's the word for the day. That we would eagerly expect good things. Whatever this next year will bring, consider yourself a citizen of heaven. A number of things will happen when you do. One, it's very liberating to be a citizen of heaven, which is basically a vertical understanding rather than this horizontal understanding of whatever politicians might do for us or against us, right? So we do not care. We care enough to be involved in politics and to speak for righteousness and justice, but we're not fearing politicians. We're fearing our Lord in a good way. We're respecting him in a good way. So we're looking to God for this answer for us to go forth and do what he wants us to do. So you know what my fear is for you, though? Is you're not expecting anything. My fear is you're not expecting anything at all. And so how can he bless you if you're not eagerly expecting it? He knows our disposition. He knows our attitude. He knows who we are and what we're struggling with. And when we're not expecting anything, yes, our human condition is to go negative. So many years ago when I was in ministry here the first time, believe it or not, I struggled with a little bit of cynicism. Just a little bit. But that cynicism was growing and growing and growing, and I had to do something about it. I even prayed about it. I remember praying about it. But God did something very unique to me. I still am blown away what he did and how he did it. He sent me to death row. Not because I did anything, but sent me to death row to do ministry. I have never had a desire to do prison ministry in a sense. I was open to it, but I don't know how this I do know how it turned out. But what happened was, you need to go do this, is what God said. See, I had a really good friend here. His name was Jürgen Rukoft. His wife is still here, Claire. She's been working very faithfully in the craft circle mission. But Jürgen was steeped in prison ministry. He did tons of work in prison ministry. And pancreatic cancer was his diagnosis. So he said, hey, I want to go out to lunch with you. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. Go over to Jason's Deli. We sit down, and he then shared the diagnosis. And he says, I'm here to make a request as a dying man to you. He says, will you take my place at the next Kairos ministry? What do you say? Of course. A dying man's request? Yes, I'll do that. Now, I didn't look at my calendar. I just said yes. He says, great, we'll send you the details. And when I looked at the calendar, I was like, oh, man. That was the weekend I was going to take my 7-year-old son on his first camping trip with Cub Scouts. And I was like, kind of bummed about that. I really wanted to do that. And it's like, all right. So I had to break the news to him, and he was so gracious and sweet about it. And I'll be honest, that cynicism kind of grew into a little bit of resentment. And I went without expecting anything. And when I got there, when we were at a church, we're staying at a church, and there was a man in white, basically a former inmate, came to encourage us before we went in for our ministry. And, man, he just butchered the scriptures. Bless his heart, man. He was quoting out of context. He was making up stuff. And I was like, okay, slow it down, Stu. You don't have to criticize this. But he did say one thing. He says, whatever you gave up this weekend, God's going to bless you 7 times over. I was like, okay, it's not exactly scriptural, but I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll go with it. And so I drive out there for the weekend. We go into the prison, and I'm running Jürgen's table. And, of course, there was some, sad hearts around the table because they were expecting him, not me. And then I was going to do a talk a little bit later on. And there's a point in Kairos where we bring cookies to every single inmate in the entire prison. Now, death row is just one wing of this prison, right? So I didn't want to do death row, and I didn't want to do administration segregation, which is the punishment unit. I said, I'll just go and give it to the regular prisoners. But everybody kind of lined up and went, and I was kind of left out, and I was like, that's fine. I'm going to work on my message. But there was a group of guys that said, we want to do death row to the guards. And what did that do? That made the guards say, you're definitely not doing death row then, because they didn't trust us. So they had to get an ad hoc group together and had to go to death row and to give cookies to those inmates. And going in, one of the guards, he goes, hey, listen, guys, the people inside here, incarcerated, they're not your friends. Don't get within arm's reach of them because they want a new case to extend their lives. You know what that means, some of you, right? I washed it up a little bit for the kids' sake. So we started going through, and something amazing happened because I wasn't expecting anything. The gratitude that came out was immeasurable. There were tears of gratitude from these guys. It's like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? No one's ever done anything like this for us. It's like, well, Jesus loves you. Really? Seriously? I said, yeah, he really does, because I wouldn't be here. Oh, did I mention it was my birthday? It was my birthday. So we delivered all those cookies, and you go from pod F to A, and the A pod is where all the inmates who are going to be transferred down to Huntsville for their next step, right? They're there waiting. And what happens with inmates is whatever they accumulate over the years that they're there, like a radio, they'll pass it on to the next inmates. So basically, all of pod A, every single cell had a radio. And every one of their radios was on to KSBJ. And a Chris Tomlin song was playing. How great is our God? And these guys that were in each cell were singing out of key, horrible. The place, it smelled so bad. It smelled like bad breath and feet and all kinds of stuff. There was no AC in there, by the way. It's not a walk in the park at all. They have a skylight window is all they have to see the outside world. Sometimes they turn on the fan to clear out the air, but that's for the guard's sake. And most of the time, they're behind a wall in an air-conditioned booth. But these guys were singing their hearts out. How great is our God? Friends, let me tell you something. The Spirit of God fell in that place. It was so palpable. I felt God in that place. I didn't want to leave. I had no expectation that he was going to show up there, but he did. And the guards tried to usher us along to get us out of there, but the song was still playing. And I'm like, let's just finish the song at the very least. And we delivered the cookies and sat there and sang along with them. And I didn't want to leave. It was church. I mean, church in a big way. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then, had to come to an end, and we were ushered out. And I was like, wow, thank you, God. It didn't end there. It didn't end there. It says, Kairos ended. I drove home. I was getting a little bit of that resentment coming back, saying I missed this weekend with my son, and his camping trip, and the other two had a camping trip already with me, and I was just feeling bad about that. I get home, and, this was before iPhone, so I was looking at the calendar up at work, but I knew before I went to Kairos that I had a busy schedule that week. Well, when I got in there, everything was canceled. I was like, what's this? Everything's canceled. What were you doing? And then Rob and Ed's, yeah, you got to go home. And my secretary wouldn't look me in the eye. I thought I was fired for something. I was like, what is this all about? When I get home, my wife said, hey, you're packed. We're going on a mystery trip to celebrate the birthday. I was like, oh, cool. So we get it in the car, and she has me drive. And where do we drive? We drive west. And we keep driving west, and we keep going west. And then I realized Fredericksburg. That's where we're going, Fredericksburg, because Enchanted Rock is one of my favorite places on earth. It's definitely my favorite place in Texas, but it's definitely one of my favorite places on earth, too. If you haven't been to Enchanted Rock, treat yourself to Enchanted Rock. It's very easy. Well, it's somewhat easy to get up on top, but once you're on top, no matter what the temperature is below, it's going to be about maybe 5 to 10 degrees cooler because of this constant breeze coming out from West Texas, hitting this rock, and it is an amazing feeling. 360 degrees, a beautiful horizon, no skyscrapers in sight, no pollution or light pollution if you're there at night. It is just gorgeous. And at that moment after we had lunch and I was standing up at that moment, I just had this comparison contrast realization of where I was right here at this spot and where I was 4 days ago in death row in the presence of God. And I longed to be in the presence of God again back on death row. And here I was on Enchanted Rock. But man, my favorite place on earth. And then I started thinking about the guys on death row. And that they would never, ever experience this moment on this beautiful place that God created. And I had this moment. You know what happened? God spoke to me. He truly did. He spoke to me. He says, I am there with them. And I am here with you now. And no sooner had he said that, my 7-year-old son stood up and turned around and said to my wife and I, this is like 7 times better than anything we've ever done. My little boy was just the mouthpiece of God to me at that moment, and I wasn't expecting it. We can miss so much if we don't expect God to come into our lives and to speak into our lives and not look for him. But when we're obedient to what he calls us to do, that's the kind of thing he has to encourage you along your path in faith. You got to give him that opportunity. You got to give him that moment so that you have the time to grow and reflect on what he has for you. You know, I realized that I needed to have good expectations from that point on, that God always has something good for us, no matter what work in the church that we are engaged in. He has something for us that's going to speak to us, something good. And I expect God will show up profoundly for you as he did for me. I learned during my doctorate research that expectations, good expectations, hopeful expectations, do something unique with the brain. They form new neural pathways that are detached from trauma and traumatic experiences. Good expectations bring about basically a desire to see the best in people and put the cynicism and the resentment at bay. When you expect something good, it takes intentional effort to develop expectations, but negative expectations can happen, I think, because of our sin nature. So we have to be intentional about developing these expectations. So I find it no surprise. I'm going to ask the band to come out. But I find no surprise that Paul says at the very beginning of this chapter 4, he says, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about these things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Paul learned that secret while waiting on the Lord to expect good things. And no matter what we face in trial or tribulation, he will strengthen you. Paul's secret of being content was eagerly expecting Jesus to come to his aid or to bring him home. So no matter what we face, we have eternal hope with him. Holy God, our Father, may this be true of us as well, in Jesus' name.